on CKCU 93.1 FM. Today is a historical day. This day marks the end of an era where Ontario is closing all institutions for people with intellectual disability. The Mayfair Theatre is hosting a film, the Freedom Tour, that has documented people leaving institutions and integrating into communities. To tell us more about this historical day is Keenan Wellar. He is the LiveWorkPlay co-founder and CEO. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Tell us about the end of an era. That today, March 31st, marks the end of an era. Tell us about this historical day.
Well, it's been a few hundred years now, actually. Well, not quite, but it's more than 100 years now that Ontario has been operating mass institutions for people with intellectual disabilities. And it's been since 1987 that successive provincial governments have made a concerted effort to close them and transition to a community living approach.
Tell us about the movement from institutions into communities. You said it began in 1987, but there were a lot of self-advocates and residents in the institutions that began this movement into integration.
Right. Well, I think one key was the community living movement that started in Ontario in 1953, and that started with families basically deciding that institutional life just wasn't going to be what was in store for their children, and were insisting on different ways of doing things. And certainly in recent decades, we had the People First movement, which is, as you said, self-advocates speaking up and basically focusing as a human rights lens on the issue of institutions, saying that because someone is born into this world with an intellectual disability, that's not a reason to incarcerate them for life in an institution. And that's been very important.
Tell us some of the stories of ex-residents of institutions. We should say that the last three remaining institutions in Ontario are Rideau Regional at Smith Falls, Huronian Regional Centre, and the Southwest Regional Centre. And the one that's closing finally is the one at Smith Falls, correct?
In fact, yes. So of those three, they are all set to close today. And as I understand it, all of the residents of all three of them were actually gone by Monday.
So it's only the buildings now that remain?
It's only the buildings.
Wow.
Yes.
How's that? I mean, I know sometimes handing off the key from the institutions to the caregivers so that the institutions are not closed again. There's kind of a ceremony. What's happening around the place, for example, at Rideau Regional today?
That I'm not sure exactly what they're planning. I just know that there's a huge ceremony taking place at the legislature in Toronto, and then there's many different smaller ceremonies like the one that we're having taking place in different centers all around the province.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to my original question was about the ex-residents and institutions. Tell some of the stories. You said it's a history of 200 years. Right.
Well, I exaggerated there. I think it was in the 1830s, actually, the first one that opened near Aurelia. But I know that some of the really interesting stories, especially over the last 20 years, is people who do move out, and often because of their age, it's expected that perhaps this was too much of a shock, and why were we doing this to the person? The institution was the only home they had known, and was it really worthwhile to perhaps move someone in their senior years? And one of the stories that touched me the most was just kind of a simple demonstration of the freedoms that we all take for granted. And this was a story of a woman who had moved from Rideau Regional to share a house with two other women. And for, I understand, for what was a number of weeks, she would get up and go to the kitchen and open the refrigerator and just smile and laugh. And for people who don't understand what's significant about that, it's because obviously when you're in an institution, you don't have your own kitchen, you don't have your own refrigerator, and you don't decide what you're going to eat or when you're going to eat it. And that for her was just the joy of the freedoms that we all come to expect as part of our daily lives.
Mm-hmm. And of course, integration into community is not easy, even for community members. The Canadian Association for Community Living, in their last year's report card on inclusion, said that 50% of Canadians felt uncomfortable with being around people with developmental disability. How has the process of integration gone?
Well, I think there's two different things. I think, actually moving people and arranging a place for them to live and arranging supports has taken a lot of work and coordination, and that's been fairly successful. But then you have the whole next wave of work, which has to do with attitudes. So it is different when you have people with intellectual disabilities moving into your community. And I know for our organization, we support people to live in condominium apartments, townhomes, regular apartments, things like that. And I have to say, I've seen a lot of things in some 20 years of doing this type of work, but I've been surprised by a few things that happened. Some of the people we support being confronted with blatant discrimination, and it's a bit shocking, even though, as I said, I have seen and heard some things over the years. So I think that's partly just a matter of time. I know that in all societies, when we have changes, whether it's waves of immigration, different things like that, it takes people time some people more time than others, I guess, to adjust to difference. So I think it's just a matter of educating and also supporting individuals to be strong self-advocates, because you have to give people the tools and knowledge to deal with discrimination.
How many people that needed to be integrated are we talking about? You said the movement began in the late 80s. How many people are we talking about in Ontario?
And I believe it was a total of 6,000 people since that time. Yeah. And I guess, it's important to remember it has been over that little more than 2-decade period, so we didn't have a whole wave of thousands in any one given year. And in the last few years in particular, it's been in the hundreds, and I guess the challenge there has just been it was a lot of the more senior residents where people had a little more difficulty working out a transition. But it got done.
6,000 people. I know the Ottawa Citizen has been covering some of the stories of residents from institutions moving into communities.